Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. I'm excited today. I'm joined by, dude, I gotta cut right here. So I don't know how to pronounce your last name.
No, nobody does. It's Trappy. You pronounce
It
the
is
E.
Trappe. Okay.
People say trap all the time, and I let it
Okay.
go most of the time because it's like so common. But it's
Yeah.
Trappy.
Because I
Yeah,
always have said Trappe,
it's Trappy.
but like
Yeah.
I feel like somebody's corrected me in the past and they're like, no, it's Trap. I'm like, I don't think so.
Some people know, some people don't, and I don't always correct people, which is why I probably should. Just why people get thrown off. But I'm correcting people like all the time, so I'm just kind of like, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, that's it.
I
Yeah,
meant I meant to ask you that before we started, but oh well, we'll
that's
cut
okay.
this out. We'll cut this out.
Sorry.
So
Yeah, you can cut it later. No big deal.
all right.
No big deal at all.
Okay, we'll go again here. Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. I'm excited to be joined here with Matt Trappe. Matt, I've known for quite some time. He's a husband, father, creative director, photographer, and brand builder. 13 years ago, Matt broke off from corporate and started his own creative agency focused on creating amazing video content. He is behind many of the best docu-style videos in the ultra running space. His creative agency has been successfully working with the largest running brands. He's now launching his own brand and started writing about branding in the world of running on Substack. We'll put that in the show notes. He currently lives in Colorado with his family. Matt, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thanks a ton for having me, buddy. It's really good to talk.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. So to jump into this, I want to always kind of ask one kind of overarching question, and so we can
Okay.
get into this. You're starting a new brand. It's really around writing stories, right? Writing sports stories. We'll talk about that, but how would you define brand?
Oh man, it's such a big question. There's a lot that goes into a brand that is, from my perspective, very psychological, and it's all the ways that a business can communicate what it means, what it stands for, and who it is, so that others can understand them. A product is not a brand. A person can be a brand, but it has to way for a business to almost behave and interact in society, with a lot of the attributes of a person, a lot of human attributes.
So, what are some of your favorite brands? Like, what brands do you look at and you're like, okay, like they're doing it right?
There's a lot that are really doing it right. There's because they bubble to the surface, right? There are a lot of the ones that we know because they have done it right.
Yeah.
And there's the obvious examples people know, like Apple, right? Everyone thinks Apple does a great job on like mass consumer, like playing field. But in my world and in running, I love looking at the small brands. I think those have a larger emphasis on brand marketing versus like lower down the funnel product marketing, so they more easily establish what they mean to all of us, and they kind of have nothing to lose, so they define what they want to mean and they just go for it without worrying about pleasing everybody. So I think Satisfied does a really good job of that. I don't own anything Satisfied, but I'm really impressed by the brand that
Yeah.
they've built. Like, they've defined who they're speaking to. I think Tracksmith's done a great job of that. I talk about Bandit and I chat with those guys periodically because they're just doing a really, really good job coming out of New York City, defining what they mean and starting from a community and providing that value to consumers. So yeah, I'll probably go with those three that I see right now that
Cool.
I'm really impressed by, or I look to.
Yeah, one of the things that you said, right, when I asked how would you define brand, and you talk about the human element of it, right? Like
Yep.
giving a brand kind of like true real like brand is, to your point, right? It's bigger than product. It's got an
Yep.
identity. It's got this kind of vision, purpose, existence, right? Like
Yep.
you bring up Apple, right? Like another one I would go to is maybe like a Patagonia, right? Like you know who
Absolutely.
they are at the ethos, right? Like they're
And
not.
they'll also like they will forego some opportunities to in order to just stay on brand and stick to who they
Absolutely.
are. And that's what's really impressive about that, and is a really long-term play, right?
And I think like taking that into like our real lives, right? Like into ourselves, right? Like we can get stuck, we can get lost, we can get really confused if we say yes to everything, right? Like if I go and I said it, like I'm sure there's probably projects you've turned down as a videographer,
Many,
right? Like you're just like that
many.
just doesn't fit with my goals. It
Yes.
doesn't fit with who I am, right? And
Correct.
so the good brands, the solid brands, are the ones that we see that. I've talked about it on this podcast, I think in a few episodes ago, but Steve Jobs, when he came back to Apple, that's exactly like Apple had lost its brand identity, right? Like it was
Right.
confused. They were making printers, they were making all kinds of peripherals, modems,
Yeah.
what, like they were everything, right? And
Yep.
Jobs came in and he said, no, 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 no. Like, if we're going to do
Yeah.
this, we're going to do this right. And he just drew out the matrix. He's like, okay, we're just going to build best of class product. We're going to have one personal laptop, one business laptop, one personal computer, and one business computer. That's all we're going to do, but we're going to make them the best.
That's right.
And at the time, right, like E-Machines was out there, like Dell was coming into the mix, right? Like, and they were all just like, oh yeah, come customize, right? Like
Yep.
custom is our game, and great, that's for some hobbyists and some other people, right? But like,
Yep.
but for Apple, it was like, no, like we're gonna give you a simple built solution. It's
Yep.
here, it's all baked in, right? Like, and it's ready to go. And that was the
Yep.
brand ethos, and they lived by that for a long. Like even today, they still live by it. It's much of a broader product line, but
Yeah.
they don't release products just to release products, right? And
Yep.
and
Yep.
Patagonia, I love Patagonia. Like you go back to the 90s when they said, okay, like we now can source organic cotton appropriately, but we're making, I don't know what the numbers were, but they were insane. Tens of millions of dollars a year in their cotton product, right? Like,
Yep.
and they cut that whole line, and they said,
Yep.
okay, we're going away, and we're going to replace it with 2 or 3 SKUs in organic cotton until it picks up, right? And that's a huge shift. And
Yep.
I think brands, like one of the advantages that brands like that have, especially Patagonia, is they're not beholden to shareholders, right? Because they're public, they're private, right? Like they're a private brand, and so I think that kind of plays into it a little bit. But I think in companies and businesses, we tend to let the street dictate who we are a little too much.
Right.
And again, how much does that relate to us as people? How much do we let social media dictate what we should do, what we should look like, what we should say yes to, right? Like, so much we could get lost with. So, okay, so let's go back.
What that does, like,
yeah, go ahead.
What that does, one thing to add, like, what Patagonia does by making that decision is they just further establish a massive amount of trust with all their customers and with the market.
Yeah.
It's like, look, they're literally cutting products and probably losing money because in their longer term, this is their vision and this is what they're all about, and they're behaving accordingly. And now you're just sold. Like now anything they come out with, you're like, I know what these guys are about and I believe them, and like, let's go. I'm on board. Like I understand them. And when you're doing everything to everybody, nobody knows what you are. It's like, what are they about? Like, what are they actually doing? Why should I give them my money? I don't even understand where they're coming from. And so like the trust angle is just absolutely huge in that.
Well, and we could keep going down that specifically with Patagonia, right? Like it's not just that one thing, right? Like they have continued to live by that, right? Like
yes.
One of the greatest ad campaigns I've ever seen is the "Don't Buy This Jacket" campaign.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It's
coming out leading up to Black Friday, right? Like it was like, hey, we're going to tell it, like, this jacket's awesome, but here's all the reasons why you shouldn't buy it, right? Like, this is the impact that it has in the environment. This is what it costs to ship it, right? Like, these are all of the effects that this jacket has on just your general livelihood. So don't buy it.
Yeah, like they're just behaving in perfect line with the expectations they've set.
And it's not gimmicky, right? Like, if it's a one-off or it's like, okay, well, they're trying to be gimmicky here, right? Like, but it's true, right? Like, it's consistent. At their core ethos, it's consistent with who they are, right? Like
100%.
The down story that they've told, right? Like
all of it.
And then just their constant like environmental, like get rid of deadbeat dams, right? Like all of the stories that they've told over the years. Just leans into all of that, which is powerful. So great example, really kind of living to their core and who they are.
Totally.
So let's rewind this back, right? Like you and I met, I think it was probably at an outdoor retailer show. You probably came up to me with an iPad and was like, hey, I want to do some photo or video work with you guys. And I was like, okay, you're like, and how many of those guys come up to me, right? And like, there's so many of like, there's so many creatives walking the floor at outdoor retailer and like, but it stuck, right? And so then we're like, okay, we have a story to tell. We have something like, let's let's reach out. And then we hired you for a project, and we got to tell some fun stories. You've told some really fun stories with Altra over the years, but also with a lot of other brands. What is one of the funnest stories that you've been able to tell? And it doesn't have to be an Altra story. We don't have to play the bias here.
all
So
all the doc films that I've made have been really, really fun. They're like brand stories on a high level, right? Trying to find a message within somebody running a race or doing a big project or something along those lines. Creating a story that ties in with a lot of the things the brand stands for. It's sort of like we just were talking about, right, with Patagonia. Doing those things with different brands and tying in real world stories that have like power and emotion and linking those to brands, those are the most fun for me. And there's a bunch of doc films that I've done. I've also done all the ads and things further down the funnel, things for social. Those aren't as fun or meaningful. And really they've become super formulaic. That's a lot of the stuff I've turned down in the last several years. But to answer your question, like a lot of the bigger doc films, things I've done with Joe Grant, things I've done with Jim Walmsley, those are the ones that stick in my mind.
Awesome. Do you have a specific this is this is my career in a nutshell from this one video, or
I don't. No,
it's too like many good ones. Yeah. No, dude, watching your career, like the fun thing is like we met really early on in your creative career, right?
We did.
Like we were probably among a handful of brands that you had gotten started with early on, and so it's
2012,
been fun
2013 in there.
So it's been fun to watch you over the last 10, 11 years, right? Like be able to grow this and tell some of these really cool stories.
Thank you.
It was probably 7 years ago we ran into you up in Chamonix when my wife was racing UTMB, and you were doing a docu-series up there that year, and it's been fun. So like as you've had all of these experiences, like what is one of the more challenging moments of your career as a creative?
I think the hardest for me has been trying to balance making an ad with making something that provides value to the viewer. So clients and this is why throughout my career I've started to move myself sort of up the chain, like being given a brief that says, to sell a running shoe, for example. That's just it's just an overt ad with shoe features and benefits and those sorts of things. Trying to turn that from something that people are going to swipe past because they just know they're being advertised to, turning that into something that will give people, even in a really short ad, like a little glimpse of value that will make them take it in or give it that extra pause. So that short stuff, those like real overt like conversion type ads really further down the funnel, those are the most difficult for me, just like from an execution standpoint. Other things that are part of the job, which is, I mean, a lot of other things are like, forming teams, like growing people, developing people, leading a crew on a shoot that, in my experience, like for me has been anywhere from a couple people up to like 40, 50 people. And also like the sales side of my job. Like you talked about me walking around, with an iPad at Outdoor Retailer, like putting yourself out there, especially earlier in your career when you don't really feel like you have a lot to show people. That's really hard, and it doesn't really get easier the further you get into your career. You may have more to show people, but you still have to constantly be selling yourself because the people that are going to hire you are all constantly changing, moving jobs. New people are coming in, new people are going. Like you get an established network, but it's never something you can slow down on, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it is also a huge challenge for sure.
Yeah, I could totally see that, right? Like I've run a couple of agencies. I currently am running one right now, right? It's the churn is tough, right? Like
it's real.
And especially when you're like as a creative, you're not really on a retainer necessarily with a lot, like this is a single project, right? Like, and maybe you can get them to do, okay, like let's go do 3 video shoots, or let's do 5 photo shoots or something like that, right? Like maybe you can get a bundle or something, but like you're probably always chasing that next deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, you want to get the longer term stuff. You want to package things. You want to get a retainer. There's some downsides to that though too. Like say you got on a retainer with a big client and you're just working like crazy for them over the course of like a year. When that ends, like there's a fall off because you haven't been spending that year keeping up and talking to and retaining other clients too. So there's a downside to that, even though like that can maybe buy you a bit of time or a bit of security. But the grind is real for sure.
Well, and it's like you talk about mobility of like people in those positions, right? Like I just think back to the days when I was an outdoor retailer, right? Like I knew the CMO at Nathan. I knew the guys, like all these guys, right? Like we know who all these guys were, right? Like Stance on the floor, like all of these people, but none of them, I don't think any of them are there anymore.
100%.
And like
absolutely,
Altra's probably got the fourth or fifth person that was my role, right? Like it's like
easily
it's just this constant turnover, and it's like it's not necessarily people moving up. People are just switching companies, because it's another thing if it's like, okay, that person moved up and they can still be a contact, but they're switching companies in most cases, right? And so, which can be good, because then maybe you can get with another company, but it's still like you got to chase that.
Yeah, so. Or I mean, they may move to some brand that has their product and what they do isn't no longer relevant to what I shoot anymore. Like that happens all the time. Or,
yeah, for sure.
There's people I met in totally different circumstances to like, you know, me being hired by them that then end up in positions and they are able to hire me. And there isn't like a lot of patterns. It is just like chaos. And keeping track of all of it, staying on top of it, and staying top of mind is a lot of work. It's a lot of time for any freelancer, for sure.
So I would consider you a brand marketer. Like I'd consider you kind of a brand genius.
I think
like,
that way.
I think you do, right? But at what point in your career do you feel like you went from, okay, I'm a videographer, photographer, to like now I'm a brand marketer? So
I went like I'll back way up with my background a bit, because I think I always thought that way. My background is in biotech and like in diagnostics specifically, and so I went to business. I worked in a lab. Like I was like a pre-med. I was like way down the life sciences route. But I went to business school. I met a lot of people. I did a couple of broad programs like in different parts of Europe. Met like colleagues that were, you know, coming from Dartmouth and coming from Northwestern and some of like Kellogg and some of the best business schools. Just got like a lot of like global exposure. And from a marketing standpoint, because I went to business school with the idea to balance out a lot of that like technical knowledge that I had with marketing strategy and entrepreneurship. Like those are really like three specializations I had at the time. But I met a lot of people, traveled a lot, and just got a lot of confidence in my ability in those areas that I hadn't had. Like I really hadn't taken a lot of business or marketing courses. I had just been super science heavy. So then I worked at two different startups in biotech and was given a lot of responsibility, like right off the bat, right out of business school. I mean, I ran marketing for half the globe for a biotech startup, like making super technical products and having to call on like lab directors with like multiple PhDs that were like just absolutely brilliant people that like you cannot bullshit whatsoever about like any science at like anything. So I really had like a leadership role and a very dynamic role in growing that business, and I learned a ton. Like the scale with which like I was able to ramp myself up was crazy. I moved into like sales and did some management, had some employees work for me, and really had this like dynamic experience in like 3 or 4 years total of time, like fairly quickly.
That's awesome. So let me tweak that question then. Let me tweak that question with that background, right? With that backdrop.
Yeah.
Why jump out of biotech, which you're like moving, you're progressing, you're growing your career in, and then jump to become a creative, right? Like jump to be a videographer, photographer, creative director. Like why make that shift?
Because I just decided to bet on myself and do something that I was more interested in. It really was like pretty that simple. Like I had a push though, which helped me. Like I worked for these small startups and they would get acquired by a massive company, and then they'd, you know, carve your job role down to like this much of what it had been at the startup, and you're supposed to be happy with that. And I hated that because now I was completely bored out of my mind. I didn't want to just do this one thing. I loved like feeling responsibility for all these things.
Yeah.
So then I would leave and I went to another startup. And so I went through that cycle a couple times. So I was laid off the last time. My daughter was a week old at the time. Like it was my first day back after, like, to work after she was born, when they decided it was an appropriate time to lay me off. And that was the kick I needed, because I was already kind of disenchanted with the massive venture capital and like big business aspect of like, you know, the pharma and like biotech world. But then that would just seal it for me. I was like, all right, I'm going to absolutely go try to do something else, because what do I have to lose? I'll go find another job and, you know, with my tail between my legs and do this if I have to. But I had been taking photos like a lot during grad school, traveling around. I had been running a lot. I'd always been like into sports my whole life, you know, basketball, soccer, and then running. And that was something I really liked to do. And social media was really coming up, and camera technology was really taking off, and the timing for the need for that was exploding. So I decided just to bet on myself and go try to figure this out and learn this new thing. And I just jumped. I just leapt.
Good for you. Timing did play a big part in that, right? Like, absolutely.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because this was 2011, 2012. So it's like,
Right.
okay, like Instagram is becoming something. YouTube is really taking off from a corporate standpoint, right? Like,
Yep.
And companies are starting to, okay, we really probably ought to lean into this, right? And shortly after, Facebook launched their video platform, and then, so then the rest is history, right? Like,
that's it. Yeah. So the timing was there, and you could see that a bit. I wasn't like blind to that, but I mean, it's hard to project out now, like 12 years later, what all that turned into. I don't know if I could see that far ahead, but I feel like there was definitely something there. And when I started to take, you know, just showing up to events and taking a few photos and like sending them out to brands, and there was an immediate, like pretty quick response without me having put much effort into this. And that was really encouraging. It was like, okay, like if I really like gave this a go, I feel like I could get somewhere.
Yeah. And I feel like you picked a niche, right? Like you said, okay, I'm going to work in the running space specifically, right? Like you probably did some outdoor stuff too, but running was kind of your niche. I think that played a big part for you, right?
I agree.
There really, like during the teens, the 20 teens, having been in that world, like there wasn't a lot of you guys, right? Like there's a few that I know, like that we used and stuff, but they kind of did too broad of an arena, whereas you were just hyper focused. You were like, I'm going to be running, and I think even a little more, you were even more hyper focused on the ultra running world specifically.
And trail running. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would go to races, and there were no more than a handful of us at major races in Western states or Hard Rock that were there capturing these races back then, and that's such a different scene than it is now. It's like madness. But I feel like the timing was really good.
Yeah, and even like probably half of the video guys that were there weren't with brands. They were with they were like an I Run Far or somebody like that was some sort of media outlet, right? Like it wasn't.
The editorial was still real then. I mean, it was like it was dying off or changing really, but I mean, shooting for a print magazine was like a totally normal gig to have 10 years ago that you don't see it now. The outlets are still there, right? Their forms have just changed. Yeah. But it's changed so much. And to have been there and kind of see like witness through all of that and live through that I've learned a lot with all that too.
So where do you see the industry going? Like, is it become too much of a commodity now where it's like, okay, everybody's got, because you can go, like, everybody feels like now with AI and Lightroom and Premiere Pro, right? Like anybody can go pull out an iPad and like I can produce video, right? Like, is it more of a commodity? Like where's the professional photographer, videographer over the next decade?
So it's been a lot of my motivation and my curiosity about like sort of moving up this creative chain and going from being a photographer to, you know, directing films, directing campaigns, but also like being a creative director or someone just in brand marketing. That's sort of, I think there's more emphasis on those roles now because there's such a so much noise being created. There's so much video, there's so much photo being created that you got to find your niche, you got to find your message, and you have to find a way to stand out. Like leaning into some of our earlier conversation, right? We opened the podcast with, and there's like the quality over quantity conversation is like kind of shifting back to quality from quantity, if that makes sense. So that's where I see it going. I think there's so much out there that you have to be really smart and really clever about the way you deliver your brand messages. I'll say that kind of, broadly to encompass not just photo and video, but events and activations and all the things that brands do as well. You have to be pretty calculated and smart and creative about how you do those things. So I think the differentiation starts up that chain a bit farther, because there's a lot of people creating content that have a really, really good time and a really, really good eye and will take a fantastic photo. Like, I think that's not a massive differentiation point anymore as much as it used to be 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I've dabbled in photography myself over the last seven years, and it's just amazing the tools that are available. But
Yeah,
how much
absolutely.
how much of it, to your point, right? It still relies on the eye. Like, composition is crucial,
Mhm.
right? Like, being able to
Mhm.
understand the settings of your camera, all of that stuff. But so is like my curiosity, right? Like, as we look at, okay, Trappy's got, like, he's told all these stories. He's got this brand, this, like, building this creative brand, essentially, right? Of building other people's brand stories. Like, how do you continue to kind of foster that creativity and come up with new ideas? Like, are you relying on the brands to tell those stories, or are you like, hey, because I know the answer to this question, right? Like, you're usually pitching the brand to, like, hey, this is the story I think we should tell. But, like, how much of that is like you coming up with that versus like the brand versus kind of a collaborative effort? Like, what
Mhm.
does that look like for you?
So that's been a big shift for me as I shot more and more campaigns. It just created more and more. It went from being, here's the brief, make this for us, and I would be like, okay, great, like, because I was just so happy to be able to do this. Like, what a privilege! I can't believe I'm making this work. This is rad. Cool. Let's do your thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Then that the more that I created, the more I just started to have my own ideas. And so I started to push that a little bit more, moving into creative direction and pitching ideas versus like, let me execute your ideas. And now sort of even like beyond that, I guess, because I still do a lot of creative direction work with brands, smaller projects, larger projects. The longer term is of course better, because I think I can have a bigger effect than in single projects. But I've also just started doing that on my own. I had this sort of just like epiphany one day of like, why am I only creating value for other brands with things I feel like I'm good at? Why aren't I just doing this for myself too? And I would say that to anyone that is a creative, have your side project that you're working on yourself, that you can be creative and just free to flow within, and try to create some value for yourself. So I started doing that as well, and started my own lifestyle brand in running very, very recently. It's still work in progress, but but I kicked it off.
So let's come back to a couple things, but since you bring it up, like,
Yeah.
let's talk about the new
Yeah.
lifestyle brand. Like,
Okay, cool.
so you kind of talk about, like, okay, like, why am I telling all these stories for everybody else when I
Yeah.
could be telling some of these stories for my own projects, my own brand? And
Yeah.
so that kind of evolves into creating your new brand. So kind of
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about it,
Sure.
like what drives it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
taking it, etc.
You've got it. So the brand is called Altra Sportif, which is French for like an author in sport, and that references all of the community and all of the people that comprise what I describe as the magic of running and really of trail running at this point, for the brand specifically. It's going to an event, it's going to a race, and just feeling a part of something bigger than yourself, feeling that magic of accomplishing something, having people support you, and leaving you feeling uplifted as a human and as a person. It's not product tied. It's a very psychological benefit, and it's really why I love the sport. Like, it's why I really like to go to races. And I think whether you run 100 miles and you're physically feeling terrible, you're emotionally feeling really, really fulfilled after an event like that. So this sort of psychological benefit was something that I wanted to lean into versus a product benefit. And I think the lifestyle area within running is super underserved. All the products, for the most part, that we see are all performance-based products with carbon plates in the shoes or some like new wicking fabric. Like it's just, there's so much of it now. But runners love identifying as runners, and they want the world to know that they're runners and what they're wearing and how they're behaving and what they're doing, like throughout the entirety of their day or their week. So I want to speak to that a bit. And I thought if I tied that idea with this sort of strategy or this sort of market fit, that it would work really, really well. So I'm doing a few things. I have a film series that I've just started. The first film is coming out on Friday. I'm not sure when you're launching this, but it's coming out Friday, September 6th on our YouTube.
So it'll be live by the time this launches. So yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So find Artur Sportif on YouTube. Check it out. It's called Junko. It's an amazing story.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, killer. And then we'll have a podcast that sort of supports that goes a bit deeper with the people that the films are about, but also talks to other people with just really amazing stories that speak to that intangible magic of a sport like running. And then I have runs that I do locally, sort of in-person experiences with people that we're starting to build and get bigger, and we'll hopefully expand on. And then I'll have merch eventually. We'll have some lifestyle product, t-shirts and hats to start, but I have a lot of other ideas, and I'm not a product designer, so that's like really where I'm probably learning the most.
Yeah.
And it's really, really fun. I mean, I'm working with some designers to, for designs and patterns and things, and that's a really, really cool learning experience for me. But the whole idea is also to just slow down and take in a film, take in a podcast. I started writing on Substack, things that make you slow down, think, and consume something beyond the zombie scroll of social media, where all of a sudden 10 minutes are gone and nobody looks up from their phone and goes, yeah, that was great. Like that just never happens. So I'm trying to get people to slow down too, and hopefully be a bit of a zag when everybody's zigging, or vice versa, because there's such an emphasis on performance marketing. And I've been asked to make a lot of those, 15 6-second ads and 48 of them or something. So I'm taking a bit of a counter approach, like tactically as well.
No, that's great. I love that. And I think like we look at where does social media go? Where does marketing go? Where like it's hard to predict the future, right? Like coming into this in the ends, we could kind of see, okay, social media is going to become something, right? Like now it almost seems like, okay, maybe the pendulum's going to swing back a little bit, right? Like longer form might have a better place, right? Like, but I think one thing that's always constant in humans is we love good narrative, right? Like we love a good story. The greatest books that we can ever like think of, right? Like whether it's Count of Monte Cristo, Les Miserables, right? Like Huck Finn, like they're all narrative, right? Like, they're all stories. That's what like Harry Potter, right? Like we love a good story, and we love exploring and stepping outside of our world and maybe living in through somebody else. And so the power of narrative, the power of story, I think has a lot of staying power. And as a founder myself, I loved leaning into the narrative of our origin, right? Like we started Altra to change lives, right? Like it wasn't just, okay, let's go build a product and see if we can make a bunch of money. Like it was about changing lives. It was about helping people get off the couch and be runners and go and experience, go further than they ever thought they could. Like when I started Altra, I was like, I'll be lucky to run a half marathon. Like I've run several 50Ks. I've run a 50 miler. Like I never thought that was going to ever happen. Right. Like not a chance. Right. Like maybe my wife, but not me. Like but it's that narrative, right? Like it's buying into that concept and that story and that feeling and that experience, and then it takes us to places mentally, physically that we didn't necessarily think we could get to before.
That's right.
And that's the power of good narrative, right?
Yeah. The story it's just baked into our DNA. Like it is what makes us human and differentiates us from other species. Like we tell stories, we learn from stories, and we've evolved because of the stories that we've passed down. So that is a huge part of our DNA. But also, like, I mean, speaking to what you were talking about, like getting people running, like that, like as far as the brand goes, like the message and like that magic and that experience, like that psychological benefit is something that I think really gets people running and moving and outside as well. This idea you can do more and you think you can, all of this stuff. And I feel like there's a lot of products trying to provide tools for people to do that, but like the psychological like motivation and inspiration to do that is underserved, I would say, by brands. I think they're very product heavy, and here's the tool, now you can do this thing. And there's so much more than that goes into getting somebody to run like 50K, let alone 100 miles on a trail. It's not like, oh, I have a comfy shoe that feels good, now I'm golden. Like there's so much more psychologically that has to happen to get people moving, get people outside. And I think that's underserved in running.
Well, and it's such a tricky thing coming from a marketer, right? Coming from that brand marketer standpoint is like, I'm working on an article right now to post on my Substack, that qualitative or quantitative, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's too often we get stuck in the quantitative data, right? Like,
yes.
Okay, I need the 15-second ads because the 15-second ads get me a 3-to-1 ROAS, right? Like, right. And that's what I need to be profitable. Correct. Like that's what we've got to go do, right? Whereas the qualitative can be a feel good, it can be an emotion, but it takes a long time to get traction, and
it's brand marketing.
Like it just, so it's not that immediate fix, right? And we get so stuck on this immediate fix.
100%.
Simon Sinek talks about this a lot, right? Like one of the chat, like, and I call it Welchianomics, right? Is the idea that it's like, okay, the next quarter, right? Like we got to just crush this quarter and the next quarter. It's not like, okay, where are we going to be a year or two down the road? And I think brands tend to forget about that, right?
Yes.
Whereas if we thought, like, and this is where I love Patagonia, right? Because I see Patagonia thinking years in advance, and they aren't worried about, okay, if we're up 10% this quarter, because they don't have to worry about the street, right? Like going back to that, like
100%.
They don't have to worry about share price, right? Like, 100%. And even brands that, like, there are a lot of brands that are public that say, okay, you know what? Like, it's fine if we take a hit on our share price for the next 3 quarters. Like, we don't care because we're building this thing that's going to be a lot better down the road. And then they get down the road because they've built it. They've built it into their ethos. It's who they are. It's the story. It's the narrative. It's the product that associates with that. Yeah. They become way more profitable.
They do.
And I think we tend to get so like immediate fix oriented, right? That like we just focus so much on the quantitative that we forget the qualitative side of things, right? Like, what's the emotion? What's the right? Like
I think that
in a more meaningful way, and that was one of the things that I really tried to lean into with Altra. We had corporate pushback from our parent company at the time, and then when Altra got acquired, there's a new president in place, and then it really dropped off. And thankfully, with the new current president, Jen is bringing it back, and things are starting to come back to like, okay, like let's tell stories, let's be oriented around that. And so we're starting to see that, but not to the point that you're talking about, right? Like we need to see more brands truly lean into the emotional, psychological side of whatever their focus is, right? Like, and here we're talking specifically about running, but there's such a psychological component of it, right? Like,
absolutely.
You
have to be in my Substack post recently. I used an analogy of like planes and a runway, and the runway is the brand marketing. And if you're not constantly building, working on, and upkeeping your runway, you can throw all these performance, easily measurable, granted, performance marketing campaigns that are the planes. You can throw them all in the air, but they don't land if there isn't a brand that has the trust of the consumer, that they understand, that they know what it means for them to give them context to these performance ads that they're seeing. And you see engagement starting to decline over time on all the top social media apps. The engagement is slowly ticking down year after year after year, and it's a newer tool, right? All this performance marketing, social media, it's all this newer tool, and oh my gosh, it's easily measurable. And this was all this really great thing, because marketing has just traditionally been like, so wishy-washy as far as how you measure it. And so this new thing came in, and everyone leaned into it because they could measure it and say, oh my gosh, look we have numbers. And it was new. Everyone was excited about the shiny new thing, right? I think the pendulum swung far in that direction, and I think you're starting to see it swing back. Because if you pull the plug on this habit that's developed of hitting your quarterly goals based on just pumping more dollars into all your performance campaigns, it's like, how do you get out of that spin cycle? Like, you have to take a hit.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna see some hits. Like we already have, right? Like since COVID, CPMs, CPCs have gone up drastically on a lot of these platforms, and 100%. It's directly affected brands. It's caused them to sit back and think, okay, like maybe this strategy of put in $1, take out $4 to $7 isn't going to work, right? Like we've got to do something different. And they're starting to figure out, okay, what do we do, right? Like, how do we do this differently? And it's more than just product, right? Like it is the narrative, it's this story. And so like we talk about a lot of running brands here, but what are some other key takeaways that you've had working with these brands? You've worked with a lot of brands, you've worked with marketers, you've seen how they leverage different tools. What are some key takeaways that you can pull from that?
So the point I want to make too is also like the quality of the engagement over the quantity of engagement. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. If it's costing more and more and more to get the quantity of engagement that you need to sustain your business, you've got to start looking into the quality. So that's probably like why I look at, YouTube and podcasts and things that have a longer engagement time with the consumer as something to move towards. But also, to answer your question, what I've seen from brands, what I haven't seen that I'd like to see more of, and I'm going to advocate for creators like myself here, brands will hire a photographer, brands will hire a filmmaker, and they will already have the idea of what they want to create. And it sometimes has come from someone maybe fairly junior, maybe someone who has a lot of business experience, but not a whole lot of storytelling or creative experience. And I would like to see from brands as sort of an answer to this question we're asking about, quantity and quality, is lean into creators and ask them for their ideas, bring them into the process earlier, and include what they have to say in your decision-making process, way earlier on. Hire them for marketing roles. They can see a storyline and communicate it. Like, that's literally their job. It's like, see a storyline, capture it, and then put an edit together that communicates it. And I mean, that's brand marketing. Like, that's what you want to do for a brand. Like, you have to have a story, and then you have to use all these outlets of a brand to communicate it. So that, I think, leaning into creators, giving them a career path into business that, beyond the grind of freelancing and like we were talking about earlier, would be a really great way forward from where we're at right now, and give a lot more opportunities and a lot more of a defined career path to a lot of brilliant photographers and filmmakers that are out there that are just grinding every day and cannot do that for the rest of their careers. Like, it's not sustainable. So that I think that's something that would benefit everybody and really benefit the industry going forward, to include them in more higher level brand conversations and positions.
So along those lines, I have two questions. One,
okay,
have you had to turn down job offers from brands?
I've turned down a few job offers from brands, yes. I've also interviewed for a job at a brand, and I didn't get very far because I was told I had too much production experience, which so that was fine. That was not something that was going to work out, and I wasn't like in desperation searching for a job like a lot of people are. So it was something I was quickly able to move past. But I've kind of like flirted with that, I guess, a bit throughout the years.
Yeah. I think, so the other question is, I'm going to make a statement and then ask the question, but
Okay.
But one of the things that I've heard often is you either have 20 years of experience or you have 1 year of experience repeated 20 times, right? And I
Yes.
and I think the power of an agency or hiring a freelancer is you tend to get the full years of experience. Would you
Oh yeah.
agree with that? So
Freelancers have worked with so many different brands and sans like been included in so many different ways of approaching things and doing things that they learn so much. It's not just the rinse and repeat of a process that some brand may have internally. They've seen 20 different processes in a year, and the breadth of experience that they can take away from that is incredible.
it's part of the reason I love running an agency, because I get to work with a lot of brands. I get to learn a lot of different things, right? But
Yeah.
as a brand manager, it was one of the key reasons why I loved like outsourcing. I
Yeah.
loved hiring freelancers.
Huge.
I loved hiring agencies
Yes.
because it wasn't the same stale environment that we're in every day, right? Like I think we as
100%.
marketers, sometimes our egos are so big that it's like, oh, I can do I can do it. I've got all the ideas, right? Like,
Right. Right.
but
Right.
there's such value in going outside of our little echo chamber and branching out. One of the biggest challenges I had when I was at Altra was the parent company. They had their own video production facility, right? And
I
they just
remember
wanted to
that.
do everything in house. And
I
oh, we've
remember
got the
that.
team, we've got this. Okay, you may have the
Mhm.
guys that can hold the camera, but you don't have the guys that are going to come up with the concepts and the ideas.
Right.
And we ended up wasting a lot of money. Like we had like our global VP of whatever his title was at the time, I don't know, but he wanted to like he shot videos in Santorini, Greece, up in Norway with somebody base jumping, like, and like our first commercial was shot in New Zealand,
I remember
and we spent way too much money on that, and
it.
everybody was like, "Hey, where in Colorado did you guys shoot your video?" Like
Yeah.
I heard that all the time. It's like, well, actually,
No.
like we would have saved a ton of money if we'd have shot it in Colorado. But he
Did you
had to
see
have
all the
a
ferns?
helicopter in it. Like all of this stuff that
Yeah.
didn't add to the narrative. It
That's
just
right.
like
That's the point.
tried to give this like cool factor.
That's the point.
And it was like, okay, like what's the point of the cool factor versus like telling a story, having a real true narrative, right? Like, because like, and what does the location have to do with the narrative? Sometimes it was
Mm-hmm.
just like, well, I want to earn Sky Miles points, or I want to go see that place because I've never been there. And it's like, okay, well, great, take your family and go on vacation and enjoy it. Like, but don't drag the company out there just because you want to go to that cool destination. Like, what's the story? What's the component of that?
That's it. Like that is the critical component. Yeah.
So like,
The
yeah, it's
I'll,
one thing to
I'll
go like shoot Amanda Basham running UTMB and telling that
right.
narrative and going along with that story. It's another just going to Mont Blanc and shooting some rando and here we are, right?
There's a bit of a game in the production world. Like the deeper I got into it, working with agencies and bigger crews and things, like where it's like, what camera are you shooting it on? And the more gear and the bigger camera and the more people that you sort of imply you need to work the camera, like it's a Hollywood set, that there's a bit of a game there. And I've probably lost some jobs because I've been like, I don't need to shoot it on like this big expensive camera. It's not.
I don't need to shoot on the Red, right? Like it's
right. Like it's not. And I own a Red. So like don't get but. There's a lot of situations where it doesn't make sense, but there's a lot of productions where all that stuff is sold into it because it looks bigger and fancier and therefore it must be better. But like, what is the message and what is the story and how well are you telling it? And so much of that is completely divorced from like the fancy camera you're shooting it on. And like, that's always where the emphasis has been for me. And I think that's why, when I say I've had like a bit of a brand marketing approach for a really long time, is because I've always thought that way. It's like, what is the story and what is the bigger picture and how are we telling that the best way that we can right now? And having 100 people here and the most expensive equipment money can buy is not going to necessarily help us to do that.
Well, we see that across social media a lot, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I think the takeaway there and the advice that I would give anybody that wants to be a videographer, wants to be a photographer,
Yeah.
is it's so much more about the composition, it's about the narrative than it is about the equipment. Like you can go jump on Facebook Marketplace, buy yourself a A7 version 1 and go
yes,
shoot some great content with it. Like,
any of them. Yeah.
yeah, it's not going to be this 68 megapixel, like, fast action focus. Like, okay, like, you may miss on some of those things, but you can go, like, go take some awesome landscape photography, just dial in your composition, and your stuff's going to look way better than some amateur that doesn't care about composition shooting on the latest A7R version 4, right? Like,
Right, and I think it speaks to the message too. Like if the, and again, like why I started moving upstream in my career, it was like, what are we telling, and why, and like what is the story? Because if we're not telling anything that's like particularly engaging or interesting, or really helps to define our brand, we can take all the prettiest photos or shoot all the coolest clips we want. Like it's not going to mean anything in the end.
Yeah.
If the bigger picture and the bigger message that we're trying to relay here isn't there, and that happens all the time.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so what would you consider as your greatest failure, Matt?
Oh man, I don't know. I think that I'll speak a bit generically, I guess. And if you want examples, I guess I can give you examples. But the times when I have been hesitant and I haven't just gone for something, or that circumstance has kind of swirled around all the things I sort of have regretted as far as like, a failure type situation goes. All the times when I've kind of played it safe instead of like taking a swing at something, that's when would have considered maybe regrets or failures, or that sort of a category of experiences.
Yeah, fair. Makes sense. What would you consider as your greatest accomplishment?
Completely starting a business from scratch all by myself after taking a leap from an otherwise like very successful and like well-defined career path that most people would be very happy to have.
Yeah.
That was an instance of taking a leap and betting on myself and making it work, and here I am, and I'm really, really proud of that.
Good for you. No, you've built a fun business, and you've done a lot of awesome things, and I'm excited to see what Author Sportif does moving forward, right? Like I think there's a lot of opportunities for you. So I want to wrap with a few rapid fire questions.
Oh boy, here we go.
So, okay, you ready? Okay, what frightens you?
I'm ready as I'm going to be. What frightens me?
Yeah.
Anything that's too certain.
Okay. What inspires you?
All the possibility out there, and meeting new people that open my eyes to some other way of seeing things or doing things, and it just more possibility.
Awesome. So what gives you hope for the future?
My kids, for sure.
Awesome. What book are you reading right now?
I'm reading Andre Agassi's biography at the moment, but I want to plug Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, which I've read like three times and sits on my nightstand, and I open up. It's like super short chapters. Sometimes they're not even a page. I open up all the time and maybe just read a little bit. That book sort of keeps me going, or like kind of centers me back on a path of being open and being creative and figuring things out, and helps me to keep that mindset when the world wants to fit me in a box or lead me one way or another.
Awesome. That might be the answer to my next question, but what book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
Yeah, probably that one. That's just, I think, like required reading for anyone in a creative field. I would say that book is incredible, and coming from a musician, I'm not in the music world, but thinking about it through my lens of my experience, it was like still so applicable. It was really, really great.
Awesome. I haven't read it. I'll have to grab it now. So
yeah,
I'll have to add that one to the stack.
It'll get you pumped. It'll get you motivated.
Yeah, I've never really, like, I've had a really hard time calling myself a creative over the years. But as I've thought a lot over the last few weeks, I'm like, okay, where am I going? What am I doing? Like, kind of what's my objective here with life and with where I'm at? And I think of it like the times that I have been like most energized have been the times where I've been creating. I've been building something, and building is a form of creating, right? Like I
100%.
created a shoe company, right? Like I built that.
Yes.
And
You created a whole brand. Like what an incredibly creative like exercise.
yeah, and I
Huge.
guess I've just like I look at guys like you, it's like, okay, like you're creating awesome video content, like, and for some reason I've
That's
had
this
this like,
much of
I know I've had this like weird box of what defines a
yeah.
creative, and but
Yeah.
I've come, like I posted it on LinkedIn the other day, like I am a creative, like, and I'm leaning into that a lot more, right? Like I've had a
Great.
lot of fun with a camera. Like you and I have had a couple of phone calls about like certain things to, like I
Yeah.
remember like trying to figure out, okay, what kind of backpack do I want when I'm like out in the mountains trying to carry a DSLR around, right? Like what does that look like? But
Sure.
like I've still struggled with considering myself a creative, right? Like, and my mom, if she ever watches this episode, will laugh. She's like, "Oh, I always knew you were creative." Because like fifth grade, we did like some, this is going way too in the weeds here, but fifth grade, we did like
If
this,
people have made it this far, there we got them. Go for it.
but we did this like America pageant or whatever in elementary school, right? Like, and there was a contest for the cover of the playbill, whatever it's called, right? Like the
Sure.
flyer for the program, right? And so we all
Yeah.
had to draw this, and I drew out the 50 states, and I won. Like I was the cover, right? Like mine
Awesome.
was the cover art, and I've just like.
Sick.
But even with stuff like that, it's like I still just have had a hard time like saying I am a creative, but I but as I've thought about it, like inherently we're all creatives, right? Like
I
we can
agree.
all benefit by leaning into something creatively, and
Mm-hmm.
we've got to
Mm-hmm.
find out, okay, what's my creative passion? What do I want to create? What do I want to do? Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I look at my kids and I'm amazed, right? Like I've got a 20-year-old
That's what I'm
daughter.
saying.
She's
Yes.
brilliant with sewing and stitchery
Yes.
and just costuming, and like she loves to go to these anime costume conventions, and makes her own costume, and it's just amazing. And like my son has had lead roles in plays, and it's just like just this creative juice, and
Yeah.
I look at it and I'm like, that didn't come from me. Where'd that come from? But then I sit back and I'm like, no, like I am a creative.
It
I've been
did.
creating stuff their
Yes.
whole life, right? Like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's just in a different form.
That's
And
right.
so I think like as we look at, okay, what can I create, lean into that. I think that's powerful. So I'm excited to check out Rick Rubin's book. I think I could probably get some stuff from that for sure.
I think you'll absolutely love it.
So what's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
I think Japan is probably at the top of my list because it was the place that at least I've been where I felt the most like completely out of my element, and that was so fun
That's
to have to
awesome.
just figure everything out and try to order a meal and have absolutely no idea what I was being given, and just trying things and learning, and it makes all my senses just so much more aware, and you just feel really really alive as a result. And there's a lot of other places in the world I could go to get that experience, and other people probably have, but for me that was really really awesome, and I can't wait to go back.
That's awesome. I'm trying to see if I can justify a trip to the Philippines in 2 years. So my
That'd be
son is
great.
serving a church mission in the Philippines, and he's been in a training center in Manila for the last month. And he finally goes out amongst the people.
Wow.
He's been learning the Cebuano language, and he goes out amongst the people on the 12th. And
So
so
fun.
I'm super like, it's been pretty diverse where he's been, but he's been kind of locked inside of it, like a compound. Like it's a training center,
Sure.
right? Like they can,
Yes.
but he's been inside, so he hasn't been out amongst the culture, but he's been fed their food, right? Like he's been fed
Mm-hmm.
Filipino food, so he's
Mm-hmm.
experienced a lot of different things that he hasn't otherwise had. But I'm really
Yes.
excited to kind of live vicariously through him as he goes out
So
among the
cool.
people, because it's
Yes.
going to be completely foreign, right? Like
It
he's been
is.
to all 50 states, he's been to Mexico, he's been to Europe, like he's had some experiences, but all of
Yeah.
that is Western culture, right? Like it's so like
Correct.
it's so different than when you get over to Asia. And at least from what I understand, I haven't been yet. I need to get over
Yeah.
there.
You will love it.
But yeah, so that's awesome. I think like any specific place in Japan or just like Japan generally.
I mean, yeah, Japan generally. Like on my trip, we went to Tokyo, Kyoto, and Hiroshima. But Hiroshima was mind blowing. Because we went to the museum there from the nuclear bomb that was dropped, and that was
Yeah.
like so eye opening, and like emotional. But but yeah, the Japanese culture is really, really incredible. And yeah, I think it
That's
like,
awesome.
I think it's part of my personality too, from storytelling. Like I love really immersing myself in something I don't understand and figuring it out, and then communicating it. And that's a lot of what I see, like, a filmmaking project, for example, as being, and finding kind of the storyline through it, and then communicating it, but starting like with a super blank slate, no assumptions at all, right? And
I
just
think that's
learning, and I love
I think
that.
that's a powerful thing too. If you're struggling to create or struggling as a creative, go travel.
Absolutely.
Go
Yeah,
travel.
huge. It's the reason I
Get out
started
of your
shooting photos.
routine, get out of your
Yeah,
comfort zone, go somewhere else. Go among a different people.
100%. And just
Yeah.
use all your senses: observe, learn, listen, watch.
Yeah.
All of that stuff just makes you feel alive.
And try not to hit just the tourist spots, right? Like
Yeah,
go
a
get
hundred
off the
percent.
beaten path, go
But you know what? I'd
experience it.
say even the tourist spots are a start. Like if
Sure.
that's a start, like yeah, give it a go, and then maybe you'll get the bug and roll from there.
Yeah. Yeah, we backpacked Europe with my two oldest kids a couple summers ago, and that was so much fun. Like we had train passes, and like the only planes we took was to get there and get home, and everything
Yeah.
else was on bikes or trains or
Yes.
like,
Yes.
and it was phenomenal. We had such a great
Incredible.
experience. Like
That's great.
they
So
soaked it
fortunate.
up. They loved it. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So, anything that we've missed that you want
I don't think so. I had a couple things I wanted to make sure I communicated. I think I nailed those things. But I just thank you for having me on and deeming me a worthy guest. I'm
absolutely.
flattered and I'm honored, and I love having these conversations. So anyone that wants to be in touch with me on all the socials, feel free to reach out. I love just
Yeah, so
firing
where can
messages
people get
back
in
and
touch
forth.
with you?
So I'm on Instagram. Trappe Photo is my handle and has been for a very long time. You can find our brand on Instagram too. It's at Artur Sportif. But I'm also on Substack more recently. Look up Matt Trappe. The newsletter I just started is called A Matter of Brand. So check that out. I'm going to be writing there probably roughly weekly, mostly branding, storytelling within the context of running most of the time. But you really like applying things that I've learned sort of outside of running, maybe too, that other people might find interesting. So yeah, that's really where I spend most of my time. I'm on Facebook, but I don't ever check it. I think I'm technically on Twitter, but I haven't looked at it in forever. So I'd skip those places.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the evolution of it all, right? Like
Yeah.
we gravitate to Instagram, Substack's becoming something, and then
Yes.
Facebook and Twitter kind of getting left behind by most
They
of
kind of
us.
are.
But
I agree.
so,
Yeah.
hey, it was a pleasure, Matt. I enjoyed the
Great.
conversation. This was a great hour. So I think we could continue to talk forever, like talking brand, story,
Probably.
narrative. Like there's just creative. It's just
So
awesome.
much. Yeah.
It is who we are as humans, right? Like we love
Yes.
stories. We tell stories. We
Yeah.
love to just build on those stories, and brands that tell stories that we can resonate are the brands that we love to wear and
That's
support, and
correct. That's
and
correct.
it means a lot to all of us, and so appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, buddy.
Dude, that was
And
fun.
cut.